Good evening to you. This is the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings, and as I always say, it's always an interesting time when we can share perspectives, and of course, our objectives are always to have an engaging, interactive, and civil discourse, and in so doing, help develop a culture of peace and understanding through constructive dialogue and, yes, citizens' participation. Our guests are persons who express views, opinions, and perspectives of their own, and sometimes may not necessarily be that of the FBN network, the Citizens Community Forum, or that of the host. Our topics are also wide-ranging. Discussions at times may be emotionally charged, but surely we can always find common ground, irrespective of our differing views. Now, in the last, or I should say, in just over 2 years of a global pandemic, we have heard, read, and seen the myriad of economic and social pressures that have rained down on families and family structures. The naked truth is that the vulnerabilities of families have been made more glaring if one is to only measure by the increased levels of social support during the pandemic, and that call for social support. There is more of a need now for public education on the impact of the pandemic in relation to families. We have heard many different perspectives and seen the implementation of life-changing policies that continue to impact the family structure in Trinidad and Tobago and indeed the globe. And while we look on at the global community, what about our own issues here in Trinidad and Tobago? What is our crisis response plan like? Well, there are many organizations that have been responding this evening inside the Citizens Community Forum. We put the spotlight on one organization that we believe is part of that response plan, and an organization known as Families in Action. From humble beginnings, we are told, has now grown into a professional center. Now, our topic this evening inside the Citizens Community Forum, the pandemic, its impact on families and social structures. And to help discuss the issues, I have with me Ms. Leon Gushard, CEO of Families in Action. Ms. Gushard, good evening to you and welcome to the Citizens Community Forum.
Good evening, Mr. Cummings, and thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. This is your first time on the forum, so we have to give you a special welcome.
Thank you very much.
Yes, indeed. Thanks again. Well, firstly, Ms. Gushard, tell us a bit about Families in Action, how you came about as an organization. I know you have been incorporated as an act of parliament, and certainly some history and what brought you here.
Definitely. Families in Action actually started almost 34 years ago. In April, we'll be celebrating our 34th anniversary. And we really emerged because of that incoming scourge that remains with us even to today, that scourge of drug use and addiction. And the organization was really formed to support both addicts and their families to overcome those addictions. And as the years went by, we started, our services grew, really in response to many of the issues that we saw happening across Trinidad and Tobago, and in fact across the Caribbean region. And these issues included issues surrounding mental health, intimate partner violence, just anything that had to do with the family, the development of young people, parenting in homes as well, because our focus has really extended to encapsulate not just the addict, but families in general.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sure we are going to explore a bit more on that as you sort of stretch your hands, as far as you possibly can in terms of, treating with some of the issues that face us here in Trinidad and Tobago. But, when we look at other countries, Mr. Gushard, and in times of natural disasters, we always hear about capacity and resilience building and, a crisis management plan as well for recovery. When it comes to, let's say, the family unit, I believe everyone will also agree that, every home and every family should have a social crisis mitigation plan, strategy, or strategies. What, in your view, should that social crisis mitigation plan look like, in 2022 for families? Now, should it involve the whole of society approach, psychosocial support, spiritual and physical support, and I mean, I can list a whole lot of areas.
It definitely needs to involve a whole of society approach. The key thing that we need to remember about families is that they are the cornerstone of every society, and their reach extends beyond the home because we have members of families across every social structure in our countries, within schools, within religious organizations, within organizations, workplaces as well. And so the support that families need shouldn't emerge just from the family or just from one social structure or religious structure, but it really involves every actor in society, state, private, spiritual organizations, community-based organizations, and NGOs as well, lending a hand to support families, because the issues that emerge from families are all of the issues that we see in our society right now. The issues of violence, the issues of poverty, the issues of people trying to cope with anxiety and depression, and you name it. All of those issues need different types of support. And that's why we really need that whole of society approach.
All right, a whole of society approach. Now, certainly, Ms. Gashad, it can't be left up to the state, as you have indicated, to solve, the myriad of social issues that we have in Trinidad and Tobago, and by extension, throughout the Caribbean and, in the wider world, certainly.
No, it definitely can't be left to the state alone. And that's why we need that whole of society approach. All of us as individuals and as individual organizations across every sector have a responsibility to families. Why? Because members of families reside in every single institution within our society.
All right. And this is the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings. Our topic this evening, the pandemic, its impact on families and social systems. I have with me Ms. Dion Gashad, CEO of Families in Action, as we discuss the issues. This brings me to the area of what you do specifically, Ms. Gashad, in terms of the services. Of course, I know that you would have been very much all your systems would have been activated very much so. Going back in I think 2020, we've had a sort of a change of how we do things. Some people would tell you, well, it's no longer, even though it's maybe a cliched statement, it's no longer business as usual. Tell us some of the support systems that you have, and what do you do specifically in terms of as I said, being part of that crisis response plan.
Definitely. So Families in Action, because our focus is on families, we really treat with a myriad of issues that can affect families or emerge from families. And those issues range from poverty reduction, addiction, mental health issues, issues within the workplace, relationship issues, specifically gender-based violence and domestic violence, um, youth development, parenting education, and also we don't limit the work that we do only to locals, but internationals, but also to every individual in Trinidad and Tobago right now. So we have extended our hand to migrants as well. The types of services that we offer, of course, are counseling, that's our cornerstone, addiction group support and psychotherapy. Uh, we do manage the National Domestic Violence Hotline, 800 SAVE. We have our own 24/7 hotline as well, with which our hotline listeners are well versed in dealing with many of the issues that may emerge at 3 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We do a little bit of micro grants and providing food stuff to families. And of course, we are an employee assistance provider in addition to all of the work that we do with schools, both with students and through their PTAs.
So you have been getting very little sleep, Ms. Gashad, at least for the last 2 years?
That is right. That is right. Because unfortunately, the
Mm.
services of organizations like our own became of critical importance.
And there's that issue of work-life balance as well. Even for you as an organization, how have you been able to straddle both, your professional duties and even treating with some of the other things that you'd have to, because I suppose a lot of people would want to know, how, because we always talk about work-life balance, and how people are actually treating with those different areas, which at times tend to take, when you look at, for example, when you look at issues, even within the home, there's always a priority area that has to be attended to now, and if you extend that to the workplace, there are also priorities there as well.
That's correct. And as we always say, social issues never sleep. They happen at all hours of the day and night and over the weekends as well. But the great thing about Families in Action is that we have a really cohesive and effective team, persons who are willing to take up the slack when necessary, and also to support another colleague who may need to take a rest, to step away, to treat with a family issue. We've been doing a lot of work with our team as well, to really focus on creating those boundaries between family and work,
Right.
because we can't help people if our team burns out.
Right.
So we
That's
do try to create the boundaries, but we are also very mindful that we are almost like doctors. So we are often on call.
all right. The reason I ask the question is because, even in our health sector, we hear so much about doctors and professional persons being burnt out. And there's always that focus on whether there is the right formula that's being used, as we talk about work-life balance. But, I guess one is happy to hear that you have found the formula.
Well, we hope we found the formula. But as I said, we continue to be in crisis mode, and this is within civil society as well as you rightly said, the health sector, the education sector, and everyone is really just trying to create those boundaries that will work for them as well as the stakeholders that they treat with.
All right. Well, you're listening to and viewing the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings. This evening, our topic, the pandemic, its impact on families and social systems. I have with me Ms. Dion Gashad, CEO of Families in Action, as we discuss the issue. Ms. Gashad, do you know of any studies currently being undertaken that would speak to the impact on families in Trinidad and Tobago, or are there, stats from which we can glean the magnitude of what we face here?
I am not aware of any studies. I am aware of a few international studies that focus on very specific issues: youth mental health, uh, violence in the home, and that relates to both child violence as well as domestic violence. We have seen a few statistics coming out about increases in the use of different types of drugs as well to
Yes.
cope with some of the issues. So the statistics all seem to be pointing to the fact that many of the social issues have been exacerbated by the pandemic and by the circumstances that the pandemic has created for many families.
But what are you getting as a sense of what might be, some of the prevalent areas? I know you mentioned drug abuse, substance abuse, domestic violence, and I can tie that into maybe some of the cases that you've had to treat with. What stands out, or what are some of the more concerning areas?
One of the biggest concerning areas for us is the economic impact of the pandemic on families. Uh, Many families have lost their breadwinner for a number of reasons. Those persons may have lost their jobs, or they have lost them to COVID, or they may be underemployed. Their income may have been reduced or totally eliminated. So we see that there are quite a number of people in need of some type of economic support, and support that civil society can only lend to a certain point. And then they need more sustainable kinds of interventions. And of course, those economic impacts have really affected other areas of the family as well, because it has increased mental health issues like anxiety, issues like depression, issues like stress. And of course, that has redounded to more violence in the homes. And of course, early in the pandemic, we would have heard a lot about children being in homes with their abusers,
Yes.
school with their refuge.
Hmm.
And now they are home with the abusers who may or may not be more stressed out
Mm.
because of loss of income. In addition to that, we have dealt quite a bit actually with children who have been unable to cope
Oh yes.
with homeschooling.
Yeah, that's an
uh,
area. That's an area I
Pressures
wanted to touch on a little later on. But go ahead. I would allow you to develop that
with the
point. Yes.
pressures of online learning. And of course, we also look at the inequity in education, in that there's still so many children who can't access devices or the internet. So, I mean, we've been seeing the statistics, in fact, about
Mm.
how many children have supposedly dropped out of school. And just thinking about the long-term impact of that and what it will have on future families is
Mm.
concerning as well.
Right. I heard someone saying in a discussion that I had earlier on that the playbook, has not really been written, but we appear to be writing it as we go along.
I fully agree with that, because the one constant about this pandemic is how changeable it is.
Mm.
We cannot make long-term plans. We can flex, we can pivot and try to treat with it, but every day brings new circumstances that affects organizations, individuals, families, and we have to learn to flex to be able to treat with it.
Right. So you're saying that the goalpost keeps keeps shifting. Yes, and a moving target, as it were, in terms of a response. But as you mentioned, that point you made earlier on about the impact on families, and I referenced whether we had any statistical data that can guide us, because I always believe that there ought to be data, statistics, and that would be able to drive policy in this whole crisis response plan. I'm also, Ms. Gushat, looking at the story of the Great Depression. I'm sure you would recall or probably remember during the 1930s, where there was family disorganization and deprivation, and unemployment, divorce, homelessness were among the major features during the Depression around the 1930s. What is what is also concerning is that some people believe that we may, or this pandemic, because it will be with us for quite some time. Do you get a sense that we may probably see some of those, similar type things, impacting on our society today?
I think we're already seeing those similar type things. We've seen an increase in homelessness. Just with the naked eye, you can see it walking through any of the major cities.
Hmm.
We've seen an increase in unemployment. I can't speak for divorce, unfortunately, but I can speak for some of the things that happen at the home. I do also agree with you that even as the pandemic ends, we will see some of the social issues spiraling out of control before we get them back in control, because we haven't seen the full impact of this pandemic as yet, on many homes, and especially on the income of many homes, because companies are still
Hmm.
trying to see what the economic impact of it is. And I honestly believe that we may see more unemployment, and that, of course, the ripple effect to homes and families will be is going to be inevitable.
All right, and this is the Citizens Community Forum. Stephen Cummings. Our topic this evening, it's we'll be looking at the pandemic, its impact on families and the social systems. I have with me Ms. Dion Gashad, CEO of Families in Action, and we are discussing the issues. Just to press that point further, Ms. Gashad, do you get a sense again, that when we look at the economic circumstances, that have sort of been contributing, even in terms of decision making within the home, and perhaps even forcing a change in what has traditionally been an arguably, and I use that word, with some emphasis, arguably, in terms of the differences in gender roles. So here you have what was traditionally, either a male or female being the breadwinner. Now you have a change of roles. That as well, could, I'm sure you would agree, could be part of that impact as well within the home structure.
That is correct, because as you said, we understand that there are very set gender roles, especially in our society, and so mothers or women tend to have a particular role, and fathers and men have another role. And as these roles kind of switch, sometimes we now have the men being home and the women going out to work because of loss of jobs or loss of income, and but we've also seen some positives,
Yes.
because we've also seen parents banding together to be able to assist the children,
Yes.
uh, changing their schedules so that one day mom is home, one day dad is home, and what we would hope is that that has fostered some greater sense of connection between the children and those individual parents.
Yes, indeed. I thought that was also an important point, because when we look at traditionally, traditional gender roles, we always would have heard of the male being the breadwinner, and the mother being the one who nurtures the children, nurtures the home, and so, and of course, with our economic situations as they are. And as I said, not just here in Trinidad and Tobago, but globally, we have in fact been seeing some changing changing dynamics, as it were. But in a crisis type environment, Ms. Kushad, when we look at that family structure, and I believe that among the most vulnerable would certainly be the child or children, and I wanted to sort of, to find out from you specifically what sort of intervention measures that families in action offer towards treating with children. Now, I know that there are other agencies, other support systems, but specifically your role and your function with respect to children in crisis.
Okay, so our primary reach to children is through our youth education programs. And those programs are psychoeducation programs. So they're group interactions where we would focus on a number of issues. And we have quite a range of programs that deal with self-esteem, programs that train leaders to take up specific roles in schools, inclusive of peer helpers and prefects and that kind of thing. We also have programs that train leaders to be able to advocate against intimate partner violence and gender-based violence. And then, of course, recently we introduced a new program to our range of programs. And that's a program that really focused on the mental health aspect of children. That program called Managing the Mind really kind of helped to guide a group of teenagers through how they were feeling about the pandemic and to equip them with some strategies to overcome some of the stressors and some of the anxieties that they were facing. So to provide them then with a toolkit to maintain their mental health during this crisis. In addition to that, as I said, our primary work is on psychotherapy and counseling, so that children who are facing major crises, we saw a lot of that, especially when around SCA time in both years,
Yes.
where children were unable to cope with some of the stressors of that online schooling and trying to prepare for the secondary entrance assessment exam. And so we would have seen children like that as well.
All right. There's another issue again, Ms. Rishad, that issue of child labor. I know that that may not be so prevalent here, even though there are instances. I guess one can find instances of that. But when we look at other countries, that it's a naked issue where children have had to labor and to go out to work at a very, very tender age. How critical do you see that particular area, and what do you think that can be done towards treating with such issue as we talk specifically about that child labor situation?
In terms of treating with it, we just need to have enforcement of our various legislations, because we do have legislation to treat with child labor. In terms of how critical an issue, I would say that because of how we have been socialized, and some of the things that are accepted by our society, uh, many persons won't see child labor as an issue. A child going out to work at 16, at 14, it's not seen as an issue, but it really is, because it's preventing that child from securing the education that's not only their right, but is also what will equip them to move past the possible cycle of poverty that their family is facing.
Yes.
One of the we haven't dealt with issues of child labor, but what I would say is that we know, especially among our new and large migrant population, there have been concerns about labor exploitation, not only
Yes.
of the adults, but also of children.
Right, and as I said, they certainly, remain among the most vulnerable, of the family unit and the family structure. Because while adults can understand and probably be able to better cushion the impact of an economic crisis, children are less so to do.
That is correct.
And this is the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings. We are discussing the topic this evening, the pandemic, its impact on families and the social systems. I have with me Ms. Dion Gushard, CEO of Families in Action, as we discuss the issues this evening. Ms. Gushard, we're going to take a break in a short while, but before we do that, I just wanted to, I understand that I was looking at some information coming from your organization, and it talked about a 12-step program. You want to just give us an idea as to what, and maybe if you're not, if you're able to finish before we go to the break, we can always continue in the next half hour. The 12-step program.
Certainly. Well, our 12-step program is integral to our addiction support program. And our addiction support takes the form of both individual therapy as well as group support, which is very important in the journey of an addict, to find that support amongst people who are going through that similar journey to themselves. And of course, the 12-step program is very much like, in fact, it is similar to the Alcoholics Anonymous 12-step.
Okay.
So the addict must go through those 12 stages of recovery before they can say that they are, almost at the end of the journey. And we always say as well that an addict is always recovering and never recovered, because there's always the potential to relapse, which is why they must always maintain that group support throughout their journey.
Yeah. Some people may argue, Ms. Gushard, that maybe we need to change the language. When one talks about an individual recovering, that gives a certain type of connotation that, listen, it may not be that, you may not get to that point when you are fully free from whatever situation or issues that may have, surrounded you. Do you think that we need to, as we look at all these social issues, we need to change some of the language, because we talk about somebody who is recovering and constantly recovering, it gives a kind of connotation.
It does, but it also creates a firm reality for the recovering addict. Because addiction, as we know, is a disease, and it's a disease from which a person can relapse at any point, because of the reasons it's been used. Yes, many persons may have started out of curiosity or out of enjoyment for the substance of their choice, but the fact is that they then start to use that as a crutch. And what happens is that even as they are recovering, if they face any issues of challenges, any stressors, any kind of thing like that,
They
there
go right
is
back.
the
Yes.
potential for
Yeah. Potential
relapse.
is there for relapse. All right.
So they have to view themselves as constantly recovering. 20 years down the line, they're still recovering.
All right, Ms. Kushad, we'll explore that topic further when we come back in the next half hour. And this is the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings. Our topic this evening, the pandemic, its impact on families and social systems. I have with me Ms. Dion Gushad, CEO of Families in Action. We take a break now and come right back.
Prime Minister, good evening to you and welcome to the Citizens Community Forum.
Good evening, my brother, and all your viewers, listeners. Happy to be here with you.
Mr. Cummings, I think Trinidad has to be proud of this Indian oversight.
Mr. Cummings, you were asking about our operational, you were asking about it from an operational standpoint.
First of all, good evening, Stephen. Thank you very much for having me on your program. A very good evening to all of your listeners.
Every Wednesday, join our one-hour current affairs program, the Citizens Community Forum. Topics are wide-ranging and echoes opinions and voices of our society. Whether it be leadership, governance, health, crime, politics, or social issues, we can all have a civil and constructive discussion inside the Citizens Community Forum every Wednesday from 8 to 9 p.m. on Isaac 98.1 FM with Stephen Cummings.
Last week when I heard that there were 16 children sleeping in the cell in a police station, that was something that was unacceptable to me.
Current constitution of the Public Services Association, there have been concerns about how
but if
the constitution...
if you are restructuring the PSC, the only way you can restructure the PSC itself is through constitutional reform.
If the minister does not accept our request and revalidate his license, we'll have to be heading to court.
Every Wednesday, 8 to 9 p.m., the Citizens Community Forum. Your host, Stephen Cummings. Be part of the Citizens Community Forum, a place where we bring to light and discuss critical community, social and national issues, discussions on health, leadership, governance, crime, education and social justice.
We might shift from focusing on whole language approaches to focusing on developing phonemic awareness. So we're just teaching phonics, and then the role of comprehension, the vocabulary development, making sure students can visualize when they read. We're not addressing those needs. So you're right.
And as a matter of fact, I don't know, Stephen, if you know this, but there are some places in the States where the legal drinking age is 21 and not 18. Even though there are persons advocating for our age of consent to be dropped back to 16.
You are dealing with developmental stages of learning. Should it start at the primary, secondary? Where should it start?
Very, very good question.
So there are studies that are being done. The thing about it, Mr. Cummings, let's be honest, how many people really sit and read those studies or even, I mean, a lot of things are coming in different forms. A lot of the data, a lot of the research is coming in video forms and so on. In our own society, how has research been articulated on this pandemic?
Every Wednesday, 8 to 9 p.m., the Citizens Community Forum. Your host, Stephen Cummings.
And welcome back to the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings, and this evening we are discussing the business of family in the main, but more specifically our topic, the pandemic, its impact on society and social systems. Of course, I have also with me CEO of Families in Action, Ms. Dion Gushad. Ms. Gushad, welcome back.
Thank you.
We want to continue our discussion on that point that we left off there, sort of changing the language, because I have been, I've been reading, quite a bit on some of these social, issues that we have, not just here in Trinidad and Tobago, but of course, globally. And there's always been that view that maybe we should, while you speak about the realities, maybe we need to have a relook at how we address some of these issues and how the language is used. I draw attention to even let's say the persons who are in the disabled community, the deaf, people who may be infirmed in some way physically. And there's also been the view that maybe we should use a term, for example, differently abled as opposed to being disabled. So you get my point.
Yes, I do. And in fact, that's what came to mind when you spoke about the recovering addict. But just like with the deaf community who had a part to play in how they would be called, I think we have to leave it up to the people who are affected to indicate what they are comfortable with.
Right.
And we need to do that and not always attempt to be overly politically correct.
Okay, all right. I hear you, Ms. Kushad, and this is the Citizens Community Forum, Stephen Cummings. If one looks and remembers the stories again, emerging from that Great Depression in the 1930s in the U.S., there was much, as I said before, family disorganization, and there's so many things that would have, transpired at that time. And I think, again, coming out of those situations and those issues, we saw where families have had to do things differently, responding to the economic crisis and bearing down on our social systems here. I'm sure that you would agree that we have a social safety net, yes, certainly, but it is not something that will be able to hold forever. Certainly, there has to be a program, Ms. Gushad, that would seek to treat with persons on the recovery side, and I did reference resilience. I'm wondering if you have any recommendations as to what are some of those areas that can lead or persons or guide persons towards self-sufficiency, recovery. We talked about substance abuse. Are there any recommendations that you have?
Definitely. So one of the things that our society is really adept at is providing crutches for people. So we provide a hamper, or we provide a small grant, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's where I'm going. Yes.
Yeah, and it lends to that saying, teach a man but give a man a fish and feed him for a day, teach a man to fish and feed him for a lifetime. What we have to empower our people, and we have seen people and groups empowering themselves and each other. We have seen an upsurge in entrepreneurship, small businesses coming up on board, a lot of creativity among many sectors of our society. And
Necessity being the mother of all inventions. Yes.
Correct. And and what we really need to do is to continue to equip persons to take that entrepreneurial bent, to be creative, and to be able to be self-sustaining. That's one of the great areas. We will always need the buffer of those grants and those food hampers, but we have to take our people a little further than that and help them to be able to sustain themselves.
Right, because and even institutions and organizations such as the ones that you lead, Ms. Gushad, certainly you would have a role to play in terms of shaping those kinds of policies.
That's correct. Yes, and and advocating for a different approach to how we treat with social issues and how we treat especially with underprivileged and at-risk communities.
Have you had the opportunity to make recommendations to the state? Now, I know that you are in receipt, as being an act of parliament would be in receipt of an annual or probably a periodical subvention. Have you had a call on the state or maybe members of parliament to forward recommendations as to how we can treat with some of these issues as they impact on families?
Families in Action, just a correction, we are incorporated under the Company Act.
Under the Companies Act.
Parliament, yes. Yeah. So we actually, we are very self-sustaining ourselves. And so we try to practice what we're preaching.
Okay.
But we have been part of quite a number of movements. As I said, the thing about family is that every issue that you see in society, it affects families.
Yes.
So that we have worked with quite a number of other organizations as part of alliances to add to advocacy projects or to add to pressure movements and to make recommendations to the government on a number of issues, inclusive of course, our one of our core areas of addiction, inclusive of how to treat with violence against women, inclusive of even how to treat with the disabled communities and more specifically hidden disabilities.
All right. So you have been responding.
That is correct.
All right. We'd like to also remind our listeners that and our viewers that this is the Citizens Community Forum. Stephen Cummings, I have with me Ms. Dion Gushad, CEO of Families in Action. Our topic this evening, the pandemic, its impact on families and the social systems, and of course a very, very topical issue here in Trinidad and Tobago, as we are all, part of that global community as well, having to develop and, have a crisis response plan in place towards treating with the social issues that face us here. In terms of the regional and international collaborations, Ms. Gushad, is Families in Action in any way, part of maybe a regional or global? I know that you work with a lot of entities here in Trinidad and Tobago locally on the ground, but what is your reach like in terms of the region and by extension internationally?
So we are across the Eastern and Southern Caribbean, and that's largely through our employee assistance and workplace support program. So we do provide support to companies across the region, from Suriname all the way to the southern Florida. So we do have quite a reach. In addition to that, so we have worked with quite a number of international funding organizations, which have really kind of projected, it has pushed us to work with other organizations across the region, but also across Latin America, especially as we do work with migrant communities. So we've worked with organizations in Peru, in Argentina, in Mexico, I think, I can't remember, and through our funding partners, organizations in Barbados, and really across the Eastern and Southern Caribbean.
All right, so you do have that collaborative, program, I suppose, having to see what is looking at what we have here and probably even looking at best practices as well in other jurisdictions.
Yes, that is right.
All right. I wanted also to touch a bit on when we look at our society, and there's always the emphasis on women and girls, and those as we look at our response plan as well, there continues to be that view as well that we need to pay more attention to women and girls. There's a huge cry in the international circuit that maybe not much had been done in the past, and there seems to be a refocus, and again women and girls are all part of that family structure. Is there anything specific that you'd want to focus on in terms of treating with women and girls in Trinidad and Tobago as well?
So yeah, there's a focus on women and girls because the data really shows that
yes.
1 in every 3 women is affected by gender-based violence, and in addition to that, less men and boys are affected as victims of gender-based violence. So there's that push, and earlier you would have said that children are very vulnerable, and the same really applies to women and girls in many cases. And so our push as an organization has always been for a whole of society buy-in to that culture of nonviolence. We always, there are things that the state need to put in place, and there's been a lot of lobbying for the enactment of the domestic violence legislation and that kind of thing.
Yes.
But we as individuals, as families, as corporate as well, we all have a responsibility to promote that culture of nonviolence within families and to buy into it, you know, and because historically our history really shapes how we treat with women, how we treat with girls, how we treat with children as well. You know, there's so many perspectives that we need to break
Yes.
and to really to dump and to understand that women, girls, boys, men, none of them are property, and none of them are really, none of them should be violated in any way. But that really requires a whole of society approach. The government, civil society can put out as many messages as we want, but unless we have every person in Trinidad and Tobago buying into that culture of nonviolence, we will always have this issue ongoing.
All right. I thought that was important as well for us, you know, to touch on as we discuss the issues this evening. We've had, as I said before, 2 years of a pandemic and economic shocks in various sectors, you know, unemployment, social, you know, issues, family structures have been, you know, changing and roles and so. And I'm also wondering, you know, how has families in action been able to really, you know, roll out its programs? Seeing that we have had, as I said, you know, traditionally, you know, one would have been able to freely, you know, walk in, which I believe can probably still be done. But you know, traditionally we would have been able to just walk in, you know, to your center and get the kind of attention. Now we've had to put controls in place. You know, we've been hearing about, you know, the masking and the sanitization and what have you. And certainly some of the services do need that personal touch, you know, that face-to-face, as opposed to something that may be virtual. How have you been able to manage, you know, on the operational side, Ms. Gushad?
In March of 2020, we rolled out our business continuity plan that really allowed us to take every single one of our services onto a virtual platform. So we conducted our counseling online. We conducted all of our various workshops for all of our stakeholders online, where in the past we would have given people checks as small grants. We were now providing them with micro grants through their bank accounts. So we had been able to sustain all of our services. And as the country reopened and closed, you know, we really developed a more hybrid model. So you are right, there are many issues that require that in person, especially with respect to our counseling services.
Yes.
So we do have a hybrid model of counseling. We do have virtual sessions if a client prefers that, or we do also have in-person sessions. And of course, there are specific issues that we insist on in-person sessions or specific populations, for example, children. In respect to all of our programs, inclusive of our addiction support, we maintained some level of either purely virtual or a hybrid manner. So we have been able to continue to connect with all of our stakeholders and all of our beneficiaries so that our clients didn't suffer. And what we also saw was a huge upsurge in the demand for our counseling services.
Okay.
As people started to really treat with some of the crises that this pandemic catapulted into their homes.
All right, and certainly there must be, you know, you've been around since the 80s, Ms. Gushad. Certainly there must be some, you know, some testimonies, some positives along the way. You know, albeit we're dealing with some of these, you know, sometimes very what can be, very sad stories, of people and their lives. What might be some of the milestones, that you can, reference maybe just briefly, as you straddle throughout the many years as an organization?
Oh, I guess because it's our foundation service, our addiction support tends to have some of our most impactful testimonies of persons who may have, been living on the street and so addicted to substances that they have been harming their families. And 30 odd years later, 33 odd years later, we have people who pass through our programs who can testify that they've been clean for 25 years, 28 years, that kind of thing. We see the difference in their family life. They may have gotten married along the way, had children, and they can really speak. They always speak so highly of the impact that Families in Action had on their lives. The same goes in a great way for many of our counseling clients who would have accessed the service. We have a running joke in the organization that anyone who comes through the door, down to delivery people, would say to us, I came to Families in Action a few years ago, and it really helped me. So we do have a lot of that. We have many of our young people who went through our, especially our peer helping program, who decided that they want to serve their country as well. They become psychologists and other types of social service professionals because of the impact that our programs had on them. And I mean, the list goes on and on. Our workplace support helps so many employees to treat with some of the stressors, not only that they face on the job, but also stressors that they bring from home and impact the way that they deliver on the job. And they can attest to how our services have helped them as well.
Now, I'm remembering as well, Miss Ivis Gibson. I think she would have been one of the early trailblazers, having recognized, these issues that we face here in Trinidad and Tobago. And I suppose you have also been, the baton has also been passed on to you. Is that a difficult feat? You think that, to fit the shoes of who would have gone before? How do you see that? Is that a difficult feat for you, or have you?
It was a difficult feat, but Mrs. Gibson, who was actually our founder, she was a pioneer. She was a true social worker at heart, but she was also a visionary. So she poised the organization, I firmly believe, to move through this pandemic. Without some of the systems and the structures that she would have put in place, as she was creating the organization as well before her death, I don't think that we would have been able to navigate through this pandemic. And in addition to that, I would say that the journey, the transition has been easier because of the team that I work with. Okay. Very dedicated, very hardworking individuals who will go above and beyond to help our beneficiaries and stakeholders.
All right, so not such a difficult task, but challenging all the same, but not such a difficult task for you.
Challenging, especially in the face of this pandemic.
Okay. All right. This is the Citizens Community Forum. Stephen Cummings, our topic this evening, the pandemic, its impact on families and social systems. I have with me Ms. Dion Gashad, CEO of Families in Action, as we discuss the issue. Ms. Gashad, we have just a few minutes again before we end the program, but I wanted to sort of get just a couple of things in before we end. The direction of Families in Action 2022, going towards maybe 2023, 2024, 5. What is the mission like? Because we've seen, of course, you would have had your vision and mission, which would have been formatted and crafted in the 80s, but we do face a changing environment. We do face a changing world. We talked about the pandemic. None of us knew that we would have been able or that would have been masking up, and we've been doing so many of the different things now that we so trying to get from you as an organization in terms of your a vision for the future. Is a vision that you've had still holds, or do you see the need for changing and tweaking in terms of meeting our current realities here in Trinidad and Tobago?
So the vision holds with some tweaks, because the issues that Families in Action were created to treat with in 1988, many of them are still in existence today, unfortunately. But as the pandemic has done has exacerbated it, but it has also highlighted some serious changes in some of the critical areas that we work in. So, for instance, within our parents and education, there are many things that we have to discuss with parents that we may not have had to discuss in the
Yes.
80s. For instance,
Digitalization, online schooling, hybrid systems. Yes.
correct. So while at the core, our focus is still the same, it's really to build healthy and resilient families. The approach that we take remains much of the same. There has been some tweaking. There has been tweaking in terms of our processes, as well as in terms of some of the programs and services that we deliver, as well as in our beneficiary population. Because in 1988, we focused on Trinidad, and then we extended to Tobago, and now we're across the Eastern and Southern Caribbean, as well as Southern United States. And we're now focusing on the migrant population within our country. And that's a whole other kettle of fish.
All right, and I did say a couple of things. Well, maybe just one more before we end the program. Tobago, can you just give us an idea as to what's happening in terms of your thrust towards treating with Tobago specifically?
So with Tobago, there are two primary areas that we focus on right now, which is via our employee assistance and workplace support. Any organizations who are our clients in Tobago would benefit from that. And of course, our counseling. Families in Action model is one that's built on affiliates. So we do have affiliates and consultants in Tobago who may see our clients, or they may see our internal counselors as well. In the past, we have done a lot of youth work in Tobago, as well as a lot of parenting work in Tobago. But as the pandemic hit, we haven't limited to either Trinidad or Tobago.
Okay.
As we open programs, persons from anywhere can participate in them.
All right. And just two final areas, Ms. Gushad. Someone wanting to get in touch with with Families in Action, is there a hotline? How does one go about doing that? And in addition to that, I also want to get some closing remarks from you, a message for Trinidad and Tobago, for families specifically, as we straddle through this almost 2 years, as a matter of fact, of a pandemic. Things have not been the same. 2022 certainly is not 2020 or 2019. Certainly, those two areas before we close the program.
Certainly. We do have a 24/7 hotline. It's manned by a person at every hour of the day, and you can contact us at 628-2333. One of the easiest ways to get in touch with us is via our Facebook page. We are pretty responsive. We would respond to your messages when you send it, and we'll give you any information that you're asking for. If we can help, we help. If we can't help, we try as much as possible to refer you to an organization that can provide the support. I have a very simple message to families. I believe that we are all trying our best to maintain healthy families, to do what's best for the members of our families. But I want to encourage everyone out there, if you need support, reach out for support. Don't stay behind closed doors suffering because it doesn't augur well for you or for the members of your family. Reach out to that support, whether it's to Families in Action, to your churches, to a neighbor who you know who may help, to the state, wherever it needs to be, reach out for that support.
Mr. Kushad, thank you so much for sitting with us on the Citizens Community Forum.
Thanks again for having me.
Yes, indeed. Mr. Dion Kushad there, CEO of Families in Action, talking with us in the Citizens Community Forum this evening. Stephen Cummings, our topic, the pandemic, its impact on families and social systems. And we discussed so many different areas. I get the sense that we have to continue the discussion at a future date. Certainly, the pandemic is not going to go anywhere anywhere soon. So I guess there'll also be the need for us to revisit how this has been impacting and how it has impacted on family structures here in Trinidad and Tobago. But when we look at the legacy of the Depression, and I referenced the Depression of the 1930s, especially on the US, the Depression era of the 1930s in the United States, as using one example, bequeathed a mixed legacy of households. And of course, perhaps the major positive aspect of the legacy was the idea that economic security and welfare of the family should be a fundamental national goal. I'm Stephen Cummings. This has been the Citizens Community Forum. See you next Wednesday. For the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Words there from famous poet Martin Niemöller, 1892 to 1984.